Hello and welcome to the overall Period 2 review for APUS history. Today we're going to be quickly covering how important is this period. The heart of this video is going to be on the lesson topics and key concepts, and then we'll quickly wrap up with going through the main scale, most important terms, key themes, and learning objectives. So first of all, this is not one of the most important periods in the APUSH curriculum. Period 1 and Period 9 are kind of the least emphasized on the exam. And then periods 3 through 8 have an equal weighting. And then the exam weighting for Period 2 is just slightly less than those at 6 to 8%. So it for sure is going to be covered in the multiple choice. There could potentially be a short answer question. It would be the third question for the short answers, and it would be optional between questions 3 and 4. And then it will not be on the DBQ, and it could be on the LEQ as an optional question 1. I post tips about this information on my Instagram page at APUSH so go ahead and check that out throughout the year for continued information. So there's 8 topics in this unit, Period 2, and we're going to go through each one individually. So first, key concept 2.1. It's really important to pay attention to the language of the College Board so that you are very aware of what they're going to be testing on. So Europeans developed a variety of colonization and migration patterns influenced by different imperial goals, cultures, and the varied North American environments where they settled, and they competed with each other and American Indians for resources. So that is really your preview. Those are the things that you should absolutely, without a doubt, be able to explain from memory after learning this unit. So first, contextualizing Period 2. When we look at societies before 1607, you can see based on those maps where some of the prominent societies are located as far as the ones that apply to the APUSH curriculum. So the Spanish, Portuguese, and French were the primary colonizers of the Americas. The English and the Dutch don't really enter into prominence until later on, so well into Period 2. And then there's a variety of reasons for their colonization efforts: gold, God, glory. Okay, American Indians had varied cultures and lifestyles and had very different expectations and reactions to the Europeans when they came to the Americas. And Africans, especially along the coastal regions, they were having trade networks with Europeans. And what we see happening in this period is that our slave trade is going to shift from primarily female enslaved persons to primarily male enslaved persons. And so that's going to happen as the transatlantic slave trade increases. So additionally important to understand is what's going on in this time period as far as transatlantic exchanges. What were the commercial, religious, philosophical, and political exchanges that were happening? If you think back to Period 1, one example of these exchanges would have been the Columbian Exchange. All right, so then moving on to topic 2.2. This is really an example of comparison where the College Board wants you to be able to tell similarities and differences. And so they emphasize the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the British. And so being able to understand their imperial goals, what life was like in each colonial region, and what were the impacts on American Indians. That's really important to be able to explain. So if you check out topic 2.2, I have that graphic organizer there where I go through every single one of these examples. But understanding that some of the Europeans had more of a mutual dependency with American Indians, while others were much more emphasizing forced labor and subjugation. Additionally, some were primarily centered on extracting gold and precious minerals, while others were looking for a Northwest Passage to Asia. And so being able to very quickly bring those ideas to your mind is going to be very important for success on this unit. Okay, the regions of the British colonies. This is probably the most important lesson for the APUSH curriculum. And in the last few years, there's been 4 separate short answer questions really covering this unit. So if you're wondering where to spend your time, 2.3 would be a really good place to go. So this is where you are to understand the 4 British colonial regions. So the Chesapeake, New England, Middle, and Southern colonies. It's not essential to know all of the 13 colonies and which one they're in, but knowing geographically where they're located and how the environment and climate impacted their way of life, that is essential. So understanding that a more warm and longer growing season in the southern colonies is going to fuel a plantation society, which then brings in higher percentages of enslaved Africans. Those are the important connections that you want to be able to make. So again, looking at these four regions, you want to know where they're located. You want to know the goals of each colonial region. You want to know the characteristics of life and culture. So that's just not economic activity. That also is who is settling there. Was it primarily male? Was it families? Were they religious? Did they emphasize a homogenous society, or were they open to diversity? All of those things are essential to understanding what life was like in those colonies, and then being able to tell the similarities and differences. And finally, also understanding the impact on American Indians. While some areas had initial peace with American Indians, others had conflicts almost immediately. How did the land encroachments and conversions impact them? And so those are all the things that you would want to be familiar with. Check out, I have 4 videos, one on each of the colonial regions, that will really dive into these particulars. All right. Topic 2.4 is really focused on economic activity. So it's going to be just focused on transatlantic trade. So there's some changes that happen in this unit where the British begin to implement the ideas of mercantilism. These ideas are centered around increasing wealth for Britain. And so they created these specific rules to navigate. They're actually called the Navigation Acts, but they are to regulate trade between the colonies and Britain and the colonies and other European countries. And so they begin to place different laws that require certain goods to be passed only to Britain, and then Spain would purchase them from Britain rather than those direct routes to the colonies. Additionally, in this unit, or in this lesson, is going to be the concept of salutary neglect, where although the British put in these policies, they didn't really enforce them. And then finally, another concept called triangular trade. And it's these specific trade patterns between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. And so that's a concept that you need to be aware of as well. All right, your final lesson that really pertains to key concept 2.1 is going to be interactions between American Indians and Europeans. And this is a dense lesson. This has so much into it. Understanding the rivalries and alliances that were happening between different American Indian groups, and then also how Europeans then engaged and participated in them, is really transformative to the way of life in North America. And understanding how bringing in of more European styles of conflict and European weaponry that had drastic and catastrophic impacts on the American Indian populations. So 2 major conflicts that are specifically mentioned in the curriculum, which means you absolutely have to know them, are Metacom's War and the Pueblo Revolt. And so understanding that Metacom's War is in the Northeast and led to really the decimation of American Indians in this area, is an important concept to understand. The Pueblo Revolt, on the other hand, is happening over in the Spanish Empire. And the Pueblo launched an attack against the Spanish and actually led to the Spanish leaving the Pueblo people alone for a period of about 10 years. And then once they came and tried to reconquer the area, they still accommodated some of the Pueblo's religious beliefs. And so really what you're trying to understand is, what are the changes in the relationships over time? How are American Indians and Europeans interacting, and how does that change throughout the years, the decades? So what are the absolute must-knows from Key Concept 2.1? You have to know the similarities and differences between European colonies. So how did the Dutch, British, French, and Spanish differ, and how are they similar? What are the similarities and differences between the 4 British colonial regions? So New England, Chesapeake, the Middle, and the Southern colonies. What were the changes in transatlantic trade over time, and what were the changes in the interactions between American Indians and Europeans over time? All right, now moving on to Key Concept 2.2. Again, knowing the language of this is essential. The British colonies participated in political, social, cultural, and economic exchanges with Great Britain that encouraged both stronger bonds with Britain and resistance to British control. So there's really two key concepts or two lessons related to this key concept. One is slavery in the British colonies. So there's three major aspects to this. The shift from indentured servitude. So what happens is that after 1660, we start to see less indentured servants in North America. So fewer people from England or from Europe were wanting to come to the New World. And also there's a major event called Bacon's Rebellion that really kind of changes the desire for planters, especially in the South. They began to desire or demand more African slaves than they did indentured servants. And so that's one of the key concepts related to this lesson is that there was a shift away from indentured servitude to enslaved Africans. Additionally important is going to be related to the establishment and development. So slavery in the colonies begins in 1619. And again, Jamestown is founded in 1607. So very shortly after the first colony is developed, we see the first African enslaved persons arrive. Understanding the Middle Passage and what is occurring on the Middle Passage is also important. So that's the journey from Africa to North America. Also key for this part is the major differences in each colonial region. So there you can see in the image, you can see the pictures of how much of the population was enslaved. And in total, by 1775, which is just outside of the period 2 time period, about 20% of the colonial population was enslaved, and 90% of them then lived in the southern colonies. And there were a few formal laws initially. In this lesson video that I have, I talk about a man named Anthony Johnson, who was actually an enslaved person who then earned his freedom, and then he had massive plantations. So it demonstrates kind of something that was able to happen in the early years of the colonies, but then that became impossible later on. And then finally, understanding resistance and institutionalization. So as the population increased, there were more rigid laws. And so we see a system of chattel slavery developing. Here are three examples of laws, but the two major things you need to know is that bondage became for life and the status would be inherited from the mother. So those are the two biggest laws that become prominent. And then finally, resistance was both overt and covert. So the Stoner Rebellion is the most well-known rebellion of the time, where African slaves or enslaved Africans led this massive rebellion against their plantation owners, attempting to get to Spanish Florida. And what ended up happening is that there were significantly more laws created to further limit the humanity, limit the freedom of enslaved Africans. But then there were more covert methods as well, things like working slowly, pretending not to understand instructions, those types of things. That type of resistance was much more common. All right, and then we have colonial society and culture. And so there's a variety of things to understand here. One of the biggest terms is going to be Anglicization. So this is the idea that that North America was becoming more English. And so through print culture, through immigration, we see that the colonies are becoming more and more similar to the way life was in Britain. However, additionally is that there are going to be some big demographic changes. There's going to be some cities that are developing, but it is still primarily rural and agricultural. There's specified gender roles. We still see significant differences in the colonies in education. So in New England, there's going to be many more opportunities for higher education. Cultural activities are prominent. And all of these things work to develop a distinct American viewpoint. Now, when you see distinct American viewpoint, it is important to understand that this is a distinct white American viewpoint. It's not American Indian. It doesn't include enslaved Africans, but there are some ideas regarding self-government, regarding free trade. Those types of things become more and more important to people in North America. But then really highlighted in this lesson are going to be the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening. And so those are two ideas you have to be familiar with. The Enlightenment emphasizing science and reason and beginning to question things like the role of government. And then the Great Awakening almost as a backlash to this Enlightenment, where religious ideas become significantly more emotional, increase in church membership, and again, questioning the role of authority, questioning the role of the church. And so those are all aspects of key concept 2.2. And so just as a review, these are the things that you must know. What were the changes to the institution of slavery? How did enslaved people respond to the system of slavery? How were peoples and ideas distributed throughout the colonies? How did an American identity develop? And how did that impact the relationship with Britain? So to wrap it up, each unit, the College Board kind of chooses a main skill. And for this unit, the skill of focus is comparison. And so this emphasizes the development of colonial society, looking at the similarities and differences. So the two biggest examples that have often been tested on in this unit is going to be the differences between the European colonization, so between our European powers, and then the differences and similarities in the regions of the British colonies. I do have videos where I go through those questions that the College Board has given in the past, which is an excellent way to practice this skill. There are many very important terms for this unit, as you can see here. These are the terms that you just have to know. Off the top of your head, you got to know them. You got to be able to define them. I have a video, 2 to 5 minutes on every single one if you need a quick review. Key themes. These are kind of the things that the College Board emphasizes throughout the entire unit. You can read through these, you can pause, you can read through them, but you should be able to come up with an example or two for each of these themes. So in this unit, there were 7 themes that were emphasized. And then finally, probably the most important thing are going to be the learning objectives. This is what the College Board is telling you. You have to know. You have to be able to explain, compare, define. You need to be able to do these exact things. So one of the best test strategies that I encourage students to do is to either type or write out these learning objectives and then answer them. You can answer them in a paragraph. You can answer them in bullet points. You could create a chart. You can even copy and paste images to help you. But really doing this is going to help you know where your gaps are and where you need to review. And it also is going to create an excellent study guide for you. If you do this while you're learning each period, then when it comes time to study for the AP exam, you have them all there because this is really the core of the curriculum. So I hope this video was helpful for you. And if so, please like and subscribe.